It's 1634, and smallpox rips through Mohawk villages along the Mohawk River. Bodies stack up as 60% of the tribe, thousands of lives vanish in months, all from European traders unaware they brought death. America's story didn't begin with colonies. It started with tribes like these, shaping a society we still feel today, with 2.7 million Native Americans alive according to the 2020 census. Colonization drowns out their individual stories, though. It bundles the Mohawk, Shawnee, and Kiowa into one blurry Indian legend. In reality, these tribes earned a fearsome name through brutal battles and unyielding spirit. But that reputation often hides their struggle to survive against overwhelming odds. So what made them so terrifying? Were they history's villains, or just people fighting to hold on? Part 1. Mohawk Tribe, Warriors of the Eastern Gate. Let's step back to the late 1500s. The Mohawk tribe was a powerhouse in the Iroquois Confederacy, a tight alliance formed around 1570 with 5 tribes: Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. By 1712, the Tuscarora joined, making it 6. The Mohawks stood out, sending 9 representatives to the Confederacy's council, 3 from each of their clans: Turtle, Wolf, and Bear. These weren't just titles. They reflected a deep connection to their identity and roles. Living along the Mohawk River, their territory stretched from the Mohawk Valley in upstate New York all the way up to southern Quebec and eastern Ontario. That spot wasn't random. It earned them the name Keepers of the Eastern Door, a title from the Confederacy. That meant they were the first line of defense against anyone trying to push in from the east. And they took that job seriously. These guys were no strangers to a fight. The Mohawks built a reputation for brutal war tactics that made people think twice before crossing them. Starting in the 16th century, they were constantly locking horns with Algonquian-speaking tribes nearby. It wasn't just about land. It was a clash of languages, beliefs, and ways of life. The Mohawks spoke an Iroquois language, while their Algonquian neighbors had their own tongue and worldview. That divide fueled tension, and the Mohawks didn't back down. They fought hard and fought smart. Then in 1609, everything changed. Dutch traders showed up, and the Mohawks started swapping furs and crops for firearms. Suddenly, they weren't just fierce. They were armed to the teeth. Take the war with the Mohawk tribe from 1624 to 1628. With those Dutch guns, the Mohawks pushed the Mohawkans right out of the Hudson region, claiming that territory as their own. It was a bloody, drawn-out mess, but it showed what they could do when they had the upper hand. Fast forward to the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. Most of the Mohawks threw in with the British, seeing them as the better bet against French expansion. But it wasn't that simple. A smaller group of Catholic Mohawks up in Canada, influenced by missionaries, sided with the French instead. That split showed how complex their world had gotten. Then came the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. The Mohawks stayed mostly pro-British, fighting alongside them against the colonists. It cost them big time. By the end, about a third of their people were gone, roughly 600 either dead or forced to migrate north to Canada. Disease didn't help either. Back in 1634, smallpox hit them like a freight train, wiping out 60% of the tribe in one devastating blow. European contact brought trade, sure, but it also brought death. By 1783, after all the wars and sickness, only about 1,800 Mohawks were left standing. That's a shadow of what they once were. But here's the thing. Their story didn't end there. The Mohawks adapted, survived, and left a mark you can still see today. Jump to the 1930s, and you've got Mohawk workers high above New York City, walking steel beams like it's nothing. They helped build the Empire State Building in 1931, a towering 102-story giant that became a symbol of American grit. Same year, they worked on the George Washington Bridge, linking New York to New Jersey with a structure that's still a marvel. These weren't safe, cozy jobs. Construction back then was deadly, especially up in the sky with no safety nets. Yet the Mohawks took it on, fearless as ever. People called them Skywalkers, and it wasn't just a cool nickname. It tied back to that old reputation for bravery. The same tribe that once guarded the eastern door against invaders was now shaping the modern world, one steel beam at a time. So what made the Mohawks so feared? It wasn't just the violence, though they could be ruthless. They were tactical, willing to adapt, and didn't flinch from a challenge, whether it was an Algonquian war party or a smallpox outbreak. Their alliances with the British, their trade with the Dutch, even their work on skyscrapers, it all paints a picture of a people who didn't just survive, they thrived through chaos. But that fear factor, it came at a cost. Disease and war cut them down, and history often skips over the why behind their fight. Were they warriors by choice, or did survival force their hand? That's the Mohawk story, fierce, complicated, and still echoing today. Part 2, Shawnee tribe, peaceful until provoked. Let's roll back to 1600. The Shawnee tribe called the Ohio River Valley home, a vast region spanning what's now Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Around 10,000 of them lived there, thriving as hunters and farmers. Their name, Shawnee, might come from Shawan, meaning southern, suggesting their position relative to other tribes. Some connect it to silver instead, possibly from trade goods or old tales. Their rivals, the Iroquois, gave them a different label, Ontoagana, meaning people of unintelligible speech, mocking their Algonquian language that clashed with Iroquois dialects. Despite this, the Shawnee preferred peace over conflict. They lived by their own laws, fished the rivers, and tended crops, only fighting when someone threatened their way of life. That peace shattered in 1630. The Iroquois, at the height of the Beaver Wars from 1629 to 1701, swept in and seized the Ohio River Valley. They didn't settle the land but claimed it as a hunting ground to show off their dominance. The Shawnee had no choice but to scatter. About 5,000 headed south to eastern Tennessee, 2,500 moved west to Illinois, and another 2,500 stayed in central and southern Pennsylvania. Relocating brought new challenges. These areas were already crowded with other tribes, and soon, colonists exploring the frontier. Between 1640 and 1750, tensions grew into frequent skirmishes. The Shawnee weren't looking to conquer, they just needed a place to rebuild. But sharing territory with wary neighbors inevitably led to conflict. By 1758, many Shawnee decided to return to Ohio. It was a tough time to come back. Colonists were flooding the region, their population soaring from 1,000 in 1750 to 10,000 by 1770. The Shawnees' peaceful nature started to fray under the pressure. They'd fight if pushed, and now they were pushed hard. During the French and Indian War from 1754 to 1763, they allied with the French, hoping to hold off British settlers. The French lost, and the plan failed. Then, in the American Revolution from 1775 to 1783, the Shawnee switched sides, supporting the British to block colonial expansion. Starting in 1777, the British supplied them with hundreds of guns, making them a formidable force. They launched raids on settlements, striking with precision and refusing to yield. That's when their reputation as a feared tribe took root, born not from a love of war, but from a fierce need to defend their home. After 1783, the revolution ended, and treaties promised peace. Those promises crumbled fast. Colonists kept taking land, claiming 70% of Shawnee territory in Ohio between 1783 and 1800. The Shawnee resisted, but the odds were stacked against them. In 1805, a prophet named Tenskwatawa emerged with a new hope. He urged the tribe to return to traditional ways, claiming he could expose betrayers, cure illnesses, and protect warriors in battle. His influence peaked at the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811. He foresaw victory, but American forces under William Henry Harrison crushed them, dealing a heavy blow to their morale and strength. The end came on May 28, 1830, with the Indian Removal Act. It uprooted 4,000 Shawnee from Ohio, forcing them to march to Missouri. Families were split, homes left behind, and the journey was grueling. By 1840, their population had dwindled to around 3,000. They'd started with 10,000 in 1600, but wars, land theft, and displacement cut them down. The Shawnee began as a quiet people, content with their rivers and fields. Yet when the Iroquois, then colonists, pressed in, they fought back with everything they had. That defiance turned them into legends, a tribe peaceful by choice, but fearsome when cornered. Part 3, Kiowa Tribe, Warriors of Fort Sill. Let's jump to the mid-1800s. The Kiowa tribe, led by a warrior named Big Tree from 1850 to 1921, stood tall in the fighting chief's party. They weren't alone. They teamed up with the Comanche and Apache, a trio that had been pushing back against settlers since the 18th century. These alliances weren't just for show. The Kiowa lived on the plains, roaming what's now Oklahoma and Texas, and they didn't take kindly to outsiders carving up their land. By 1869, the U.S. built Fort Sill in Oklahoma to put a stop to their border raids into Texas. It was supposed to be a chokehold, keeping the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache in check. But in 1870, with about 1,500 people between them, the Kiowa and their allies decided they weren't going quietly. Texas was filling up fast, its population exploding from 212,000 in 1850 to 604,000 by 1870. Settlers kept coming, and the Kiowa saw their world shrinking. Then came May 18, 1871. Chiefs Santana and Big Tree led a war party straight into Texas and hit the Warren Wagon Train hard. 7 men died in the attack, their goods scattered across the dirt. The Kiowa didn't slink away after that. They rode back to Fort Sill, bragging about the raid like it was a badge of honor. It wasn't just a random strike, it was a message. The settlers and the army took notice, and the Kiowa's reputation grew darker. But that victory didn't last long. In June 1871, the hammer dropped. Santana, Big Tree, and another chief, Satank, got rounded up and hauled to Jack County, Texas for trial. This wasn't some tribal council. It was the U.S. Civil Court, the first time Native Americans faced that system. Satank didn't make it to the courtroom. He tried to escape and got shot dead on the way. Santana and Big Tree stood trial, facing death sentences for the wagon train killings. The evidence was stacked against them: witnesses, blood, and their own boasts. But Santana spoke up, laying out the suffering his people had endured: land stolen, families pushed out. His words hit a nerve, and the judge commuted their sentences to life in prison. They dodged the noose, but freedom was still a long way off. From 1871 to 1874, Santana and Big Tree weren't locked in cells at Fort Sill. The army put them to work, tending crops and doing farm labor alongside other prisoners. It wasn't the warrior life they knew, but it kept them alive. They got out in 1873, released after pressure from tribal leaders and a shift in policy. Meanwhile, the bigger fight was brewing. The Red River War kicked off in June 1874, pitting the Kiowa, Comanche, and Cheyenne against U.S. troops. Fort Sill became the Army's hub, and the tribes took heavy losses. About 500 warriors fell over the year-long campaign, their numbers dwindling under relentless attacks. By June 2, 1875, it was over. The Kiowa surrendered at Fort Sill, and Quanah Parker, a Comanche leader, brought in 400 of his Quahati band too. The war ended with the tribes boxed in, their resistance broken. Fort Sill stood as the last nail in the coffin of their free-roaming days. Today, Fort Sill's still standing, the last active military post from the Indian Wars. You can visit it, walk the grounds where all this went down, but you'll need to pass a security check first. It's still a working base. The Kiowa's story there is raw. They were fierce, no doubt. Raids like the Warren Wagon Train proved it. But they weren't just outlaws picking fights. Settlers flooded Texas, tripling the population in 20 years, and the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache got squeezed out. The Army built Fort Sill to control them, and when they fought back, they paid a steep price. Big Tree and Santana led with defiance, celebrating victories even as the walls closed in. Their trial set a legal precedent. Their surrender marked an era's end. The Kiowa weren't tamed easily, and Fort Sill still whispers that struggle. The Mohawk, Shawnee, and Kiowa left their mark on history in ways that still hit hard today. The Mohawk brought brutal war tactics, charging into battles with Dutch firearms and holding the line as keepers of the eastern door. The Shawnee showed resilience, staying peaceful until pushed, then fighting tooth and nail to keep their Ohio River Valley home. The Kiowa stood defiant, raiding settlers and celebrating victories like the Warren Wagon Train, even as Fort Sill loomed over them. These tribes earned a feared reputation, but dig deeper, and it's not so simple. Between 1492 and 1900, indigenous people lost 90% of their lands to colonists. That's not just a statistic. It's a slow, grinding theft of everything they'd built. Maybe their ferocity came from desperation, a last stand against an unstoppable wave. Colonists didn't just take land, they shattered whole societies. Back in 1492, estimates put the native population between 5 and 18 million across the Americas. By 1900, it had crashed to 250,000. Disease, war, and displacement did the heavy lifting. Smallpox alone wiped out 60% of the Mohawk in 1634. When these tribes fought back, colonists called it aggression, slapping a label on what was really survival. The Mohawk allied with the British, the Shawnee took guns from anyone who'd offer, and the Kiowa hit wagon trains because their backs were against the wall. History paints them as the bad guys, but flip the lens and it's a different story. They weren't perfect, sure, war's messy, and they could be ruthless. But they were defending a world that was slipping away. Fast forward to June 2nd, 1924. The Indian Citizenship Act finally gave Native Americans voting rights, but it took until 1974 for every state to catch up. Today, 2.7 million Native Americans live in the U.S., according to the 2020 census. They're still here, but it's not easy. Their poverty rate sits at 25%, double the national average, a lingering scar of discrimination and broken promises. The Mohawk building skyscrapers, the Shawnee forced to Missouri, the Kiowa surrendering at Fort Sill, these aren't just old tales. They're threads in a bigger fight that's still going on. So think about it. Were these tribes' warriors carving out a bloody legacy, or victims caught in a storm they couldn't stop? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you make of it. If this hit you like it hit me, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who needs to know. Goodbye.